Conceptualizing Brand Heritage.
Perfect, thank you.
I'll come back to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Lockwood. I'm a Milgard Scholar at the University of Washington Tacoma campus, and I'm working on a project called Conceptualizing Brand Heritage with Dr. Merchant here. And basically, kind of what we were trying to figure out is there's been a lot of recent debate about what really is brand heritage and how do we define it. So kind of the overview assumption that everybody's been running off with since 2003 is that it's some way of leveraging a brand's past history to create some meaningful experience for consumers in the present. And so what does conceptualization really entail? That's trying to figure out what are ways that we can measure dimensions, and then from that get some quantitative measurable results so that we can proactively measure brand heritage. So with the table of contents, we'll first begin with the literature review, which will go over kind of the initial study of how it has been done for brand heritage in the past, so that we can kind of create a more meaningful look to the future. And then from that, I developed some research questions, and we did methodology with a focus group. And then we can look at some results and some implications. Starting with the literature review, we really had to revisit brand heritage and how it's been traditionally defined. Back in 2003, Erd, Grazer, and Ballmer came with the definition based on 5 dimensions: track record, longevity, core values, symbol, and history. Basically, the problem that they ran into with their definition, though, is track record, longevity, and history kind of got clumped together, and anything relating to the past related to these 3 dimensions. And so when you were trying to measure something, it was very difficult because if something directly impacted the track record, it also overlapped with longevity and history. And so over the past about 8 to 9 years, there have been several other scholars who've come up with their own ideas. One of the most prominent ones right now is by the work of Hakala, Lacey, and Sandfeld. And they came up with another 5 dimensions, but they kind of took a little bit of a different approach to it. They kept to the core values, which is really what are the core concepts of the brand and what do consumers connect with it. But then they broke up longevity into consistency and continuity. So how long has it been around? And then how do you measure how it's been consistent throughout that time period? They kept symbols as well, really. How does the consumer connect with the brand, like the logo and the packaging and things of that nature? And then what are the effects? So this is kind of a revolutionary idea as far as associating the direct results of brand heritage as part of one of the defining definitions. And so when I was going through the literature review, it kind of came out to me that there were really 3 dimensions instead of these 5 that each of the other researchers had come up with. That core values are really important. And then if you look at the track record of kind of that's the continuity and consistency over time, how well is the company measuring up? Are they really holding up their core values, or are they faltering and they're becoming hollow values? And then kind of merging the concept of consumer perception basically merges the concept of symbols and the effects together of what is the brand doing to promote its image, and then how are consumers actually taking that in. And then I also realized that there's more of an interdependent variable calculus. Most time that we think of dimensions, we think of them as separate mathematically, but with the case of brand heritage, even though these are separate in their own distinct way, they have a lot of play off of each other, and so if you were to measure them mathematically, you'd be able to realize through calculus that a lot of them overlap. So they're interdependent. And then also with the literature review, I wanted to compare it to other things that come up in marketing. So nostalgia, retro, iconic, and revival brands are kind of major marketing themes right now. But what when I was comparing the research, I realized even though these are distinct, like nostalgia talks about leveraging the past, revival bringing back past products, even though they're very different from brand heritage, they can still be used with brand heritage in a sense of how do we use kind of the past and what's been done in the past and this track record over time to create a more meaningful present for the brand. And so when we went to go about doing a focus group, kind of some common themes of questions came up. So can consumer perceptions be measured? Do core values actually matter to consumers? Does the track record matter to consumers? And so a lot of these questions then with consumers easily identify heritage. The goal was to kind of figure out, are these dimensions that I came up with in my literature review actually able to be tangible to consumers? And so here's some sample questions, like what are your thoughts about the past? What do you think of companies that betray their core values? What do you think of companies that redeem themselves? So if they've had a bad track record and if they've gotten better, how do you feel about that? And then does history in a brand matter to you? And the focus group was conducted with 6 participants. There was equal distribution of age and gender. It lasted for about an hour, and we discussed key brands such as Ford, Apple, Neuhaus Chocolatier, Nordstrom, and Nike. And basically, just like a common focus group, we were asking probing questions, trying to figure out and draw out consumer perception of what were they saying and was that matching kind of the assumptions and the hypotheses that we had. Really trying to tap into their emotions and perspective, draw out the dimensions of brand heritage, and then we the reason that we had so many different brands across industries is we wanted to really see if there was some consistency in brand heritage between different industries. And the results were that actually we need some further research before we can say whether it's been consistent. Some of the brands really had strong brand heritage, and that really mattered to consumers. Other times it really didn't. And so if we were to proceed forward with this, we would need to understand why does it matter, when does it matter, and then how can we actually measure that and validate that. Also, we did realize that brand heritage can be explained and defined by the consumers. Of course, they're not going to come out forthright and say, oh, this is brand heritage, but they were able to draw out concepts and really hold it to the three dimensions of, yes, they can pull out that core values matter, yes, they can pull out that a track record over time will influence their decisions on whether they're going to purchase a product or not, and then they're also able to recognize that there are some things about certain brands that they really hold true, and they're able to pick up those symbols and logos. Especially every time that we would talk about a new brand, we would hold up an image of the logo, and they were able to kind of have some initial reactions based on that. And so what we got from that is that really these three values are held. Additionally, we have another team in Germany that's working on this project, and they were able to determine the same three dimensions from a quantitative perspective. So we thought that was phenomenal for internal consistency. I know this graphic's a little bit crazy, but if you were to basically map how do these three dimensions interplay, if we start with the red line, what you'll notice is that over time, this is the fulfillment of the values has gone up and then gone down. So that's showing the track record, and so if you wanted to label, let's just say what value this was, you would actually have it labeled here. Just for the purpose of example, I chose not to label them, but let's just call it loyalty or quality in a product. But then the kind of shadiness around them is how much that actually matters to consumers, because what you're realizing is certain values or certain trends sometimes matter and sometimes they don't. So that's the part of internal consistency. And so that's why you see, like, especially like if we're talking about the blue value, that means that consumer perception mattered really much sometimes or it didn't matter other times. So that'd be one way to graphically represent kind of the results that we came up with. And also kind of important to moving forward, what are the managerial implications? And so the next presentation, which Billy will talk about, is how can we actually apply this, but kind of some things from the conceptual standpoint is you really have to set clear core values, because if consumers are able to draw out something about your brand, they have to know what it is, and that has to be something that's not hollow. It has to be concrete from within the organization and then presented outside. And so you want to make sure that you avoid those hollow values, which you pretend and you claim to have, but then you actually don't follow up on, especially because that's how you're going to ensure a healthy track record. If you continually do not meet what you say is your values, then your consumers are going to be able to pick up on that. And especially if you do redeem yourself, like if you've been doing poorly performing, like the green line in the previous, and then somehow you do get a lot better, consumers are going to be able to pick up on that. So I guess the clear goal here is make sure that over time your core values are matching up, and that's how you're really building brand heritage. But then in order to make sure that consumers are tapping into this, you want to display those successes, and you really want them to be able to pick this up from the brand image and from all your marketing and packaging and things like that. And so as far as taking it forward, some questions that I had are, is there a way that we can measure the intervariable calculus between the relationships? So is there a way that we can pick up on how often does the track record overlap with the core values and in what circumstances? And then can we actually measure that using data? When does the consumer perception play a small role or conversely a large role? We had a huge problem with this, like especially because different industries, it seemed like consumer perception really mattered, and then sometimes it really didn't. So what are ways that we can provide more internal consistency to be able to figure out in what industries does brand heritage matter and can be leveraged more appropriately? And last, are there methods for measuring the value of the core values and the track record? So measuring how important these are to consumers, like is there a certain value like trust or loyalty or quality that really matter to consumers, and then how do we conversely measure that? And so at this time, I'd like to open up to questions.
Michael?
Oh, yeah.
Can you provide some examples of brands that have strong heritage and why they work?
Yeah. Well, I think actually better would be to give an example of a kind of company that's been up and down over the years. So a lot of us, I think, are familiar with Ford and a little bit of the story about Ford with the Model T. That was, it kind of built up this reputation that Ford was this way of like working for the average man and really building up the American society. But over time, that value has kind of sunk. Their products haven't been seen with much quality, and so I think even in our focus group, a lot of consumers are starting to point out that, well, they're kind of average, they were really good at first, and now they're starting to falter. And so that's an example of how they haven't been able to really leverage this brand heritage, is because they have been really, in their track record, their core values haven't been so well in the recent past, and that's what consumers are picking up on. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Clarifications?
Perfect, thank you.
All right.